the South China Sea. At first glance, it's a breathtaking expanse of turquoise water and scattered islands, a vital artery for global trade where trillions of dollars in commerce transit each year. But beneath this serene surface, a storm of geopolitical tension has been brewing for decades. This is not just water. It is one of the most contested regions on the planet, a flashpoint where the ambitions of a rising superpower clash directly with the established global order. For years, the world has watched as China methodically attempts to transform this international waterway into its own private lake, building military bases on reclaimed land and using its growing naval power to intimidate its neighbors. The United States, citing international law and the principle of freedom of navigation, has consistently pushed back, sending its own formidable military assets to patrol these waters and skies, ensuring they remain open for all. It's a high-stakes game of chess played with destroyers, aircraft carriers, and fighter jets. And on one fateful day, that simmering tension was about to boil over. China was about to make a bold and profoundly reckless move. The day began like any other for the crew of an MH-60R Seahawk helicopter, the workhorse of the U.S. Navy. Launched from the flight deck of the USS Chung-hoon, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, their mission was a routine freedom of navigation patrol. These patrols are the bedrock of America's strategy in the region, a clear and consistent signal that the U.S. does not recognize Beijing's expansive and illegal territorial claims. The pilots, seasoned professionals with thousands of flight hours, were operating in airspace explicitly designated as international by maritime law, well outside of any nation's sovereign territory. They were the eyes and ears of the fleet, a visible symbol of American presence and commitment. But in the tense environment of the South China Sea, routine can become critical in a heartbeat. On the radar screens of the Chung-hoon's Combat Information Center and on the scopes of the Chinese military outposts dotting the nearby artificial islands, the Seahawk was a single, steady blip. For Beijing, it was a target of opportunity, a chance to send a message. What they failed to calculate was the message they would receive in return. The events that were about to unfold would not be a simple warning, but a catastrophic miscalculation that would ripple across the globe, exposing the true cost of their aggression. It would prove to be a massive mistake. This confrontation was not born in a vacuum. For years, China has been engaged in a patient, methodical campaign to assert dominance over the South China Sea, a strategy some analysts call the cabbage strategy, surrounding contested areas with so many layers of military and civilian vessels that other claimants are squeezed out. The most audacious part of this strategy has been the unprecedented island-building campaign. Using massive dredgers, China has transformed submerged reefs and tiny atolls, like those in the Spratly and Paracel Islands, into full-fledged military fortresses. What were once pristine marine habitats are now home to deep-water ports capable of docking warships, 10,000-foot runways for bombers and fighter jets, and sophisticated radar arrays and missile batteries. These unsinkable aircraft carriers allow the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, to project power hundreds of miles from its coastline, effectively creating a military exclusion zone over a vast area it claims under its ambiguous 9-dash line, a claim overwhelmingly rejected in 2016 by an international tribunal at The Hague. The United States and its allies view these actions as a direct violation of international law and a threat to regional stability. They see a pattern of coercion, where Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels harass fishing boats and energy exploration ships from neighboring countries like the Philippines and Vietnam, slowly tightening Beijing's grip. The routine patrols by the U.S. Navy are a direct counter to this creeping expansionism. As the American Seahawk continued its flight path, a new contact appeared on its threat display, closing fast. From a nearby PLA airbase, 2 Shenyang J-16 fighter jets had been scrambled. These were not Coast Guard planes. They were advanced, twin-engine strike fighters, armed and dangerous. The initial radio calls from the American pilots, identifying themselves and stating their operation in international airspace, were met with silence. Then, a crackle of Mandarin, followed by a heavily accented English warning. U.S. aircraft, you are approaching Chinese airspace. Leave immediately. The American pilot calmly responded, reiterating their position in international airspace and their intention to maintain course and speed. This was standard procedure, a professional de-escalation. But the PLA pilots had a different script. The first J-16 broke formation and accelerated, positioning itself directly in front of the helicopter, a mere 500 feet from its nose. The fighter jet then deliberately slowed its speed, forcing the helicopter pilot to take evasive action to avoid a collision. This is an incredibly dangerous maneuver known as headbutting, designed to intimidate. The jet wash from the powerful engines buffeted the much smaller helicopter, a violent turbulence that shook the cockpit. Warning lights flashed on the console, but it didn't end there. The Chinese pilot then pulled up sharply, climbing above the Seahawk before diving back down, crossing its flight path again, this time even closer. As if to punctuate the threat, the J-16 pilot then released a volley of flares, not as a defensive measure, but as an aggressive act of intimidation. These burning projectiles are designed to decoy heat-seeking missiles, and releasing them in such close proximity to another aircraft risks ingestion into the helicopter's engines, which could lead to catastrophic failure. Inside the Seahawk, the crew was a picture of disciplined calm, their training taking over. The co-pilot filmed the entire encounter, documenting the flagrantly unprofessional and unsafe behavior. They were not just pilots, they were now witnesses. This was not a warning, it was a direct physical threat, a signal of raw aggression played out at 5,000 feet above the sea. In this moment of extreme pressure, the easiest and perhaps safest option would have been to turn back, to retreat from the confrontation. But the American pilots understood the larger stakes. Backing down would have been a victory for Beijing. It would have validated their tactics of intimidation and set a dangerous precedent, signaling that the U.S. could be bullied out of international airspace. It would have told every other nation in the region, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, that America's commitment to freedom of navigation was conditional. So they didn't flinch. The Seahawks pilot, with steady hands on the controls, maintained their course and altitude. They refused to be intimidated. This act of quiet defiance was a strategic move of its own. It called China's bluff. The PLA pilots had escalated to the very edge of an act of war. Their only remaining options were to either commit a truly hostile act, like opening fire, and trigger a massive conflict they were not prepared for, or to break off the engagement. By holding its course, the lone American helicopter had put the full weight of the decision back on Beijing. It forced China to reveal its hand. Were they truly willing to shoot down a U.S. military aircraft and start a war with the world's most powerful military over a routine patrol? The answer, it turned out, was no. After a few more tense moments, the J-16S, having exhausted their playbook of intimidation tactics short of firing their weapons, peeled away and returned to their base. The immediate crisis was over, but the real fallout was just beginning. What Beijing failed to understand is that an attack on any single U.S. asset is an attack on the entire network. The video evidence of the dangerous intercept, captured by the Seahawks crew, was immediately transmitted up the chain of command. Within hours, it was declassified and released to the public by the Pentagon. The world could now see, with undeniable clarity, the recklessness of the PLA's actions. The response from Washington was swift and multifaceted. Diplomatically, the State Department issued a formal protest, a démarche, to the Chinese government, condemning the unsafe and unprofessional maneuver in the strongest possible terms. But the more significant response was military. By challenging a single helicopter, China had triggered a far greater show of force. The Pentagon didn't just issue a statement, it sent a message written in steel. The USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group, which had been operating in the Philippine Sea, was ordered to change course and steam towards the South China Sea. B-52 Stratofortress bombers, flying a continuous bomber presence mission out of Guam, were routed to fly directly over the area of the incident, a clear signal of America's long-range strike capability. Under the waves, U.S. Navy submarines were repositioned, their silent presence a potent, unseen threat. The message was unambiguous. The United States would not be deterred, and it had the overwhelming power to back up its commitments. Simultaneously, the international condemnation was swift and widespread. Japan, Australia, and the United Kingdom, key U.S. allies, issued statements supporting the principle of freedom of navigation and criticizing China's coercive behavior. Regional partners like the Philippines, who have first-hand experience with Chinese aggression, voiced their deep concern. Instead of isolating the U.S., China's actions had the opposite effect, reinforcing the strength of America's alliance network and galvanizing opposition to its expansionist agenda. What China intended as a localized show of strength, a way to bully a smaller aircraft, had backfired spectacularly. It became a global demonstration of their disregard for international norms, and in doing so, it handed the United States a major strategic victory. It was a profound and costly miscalculation, one that laid bare the gap between China's ambitions and its actual strategic position on the world stage. The international response was swift. In the contested waters, warships from Japan, the Philippines, and Australia joined American naval assets, forming a formidable multinational flotilla, a clear, coordinated statement. Behind the scenes, a flurry of diplomatic activity began. Emergency summits were convened, and in the halls of the United Nations, delegates condemned the aggressive act, calling for adherence to international law. The lines were being drawn, not just on the water, but in the corridors of power. This single incident shifted the balance. What was intended as a demonstration of strength by Beijing had inadvertently triggered the very thing it sought to prevent, a more cohesive and determined opposition. The Pentagon issued a terse, unequivocal statement. Beijing's defense ministry fired back, but its narrative failed to sway global opinion. Instead, U.S. alliances grew stronger, while China faced growing international isolation. Nations that had previously walked a fine line between Washington and Beijing now tilted decisively toward the Allied coalition, rewriting the region's strategic calculus. A bold move, yes, but one that backfired dramatically. Military analysts saw the miscalculation. The immediate result was a surge in Allied activity, with expanded patrol routes creating a persistent presence in the South China Sea. This military pressure was matched by a diplomatic squeeze. As China's global image weakened, Allied forces capitalized on the strategic advantage. High-level meetings, once focused on trade, now centered on defense. The incident highlighted the vulnerability of critical trade routes, galvanizing nations to protect their economic lifelines. Surveillance flights multiplied, and large-scale exercises demonstrated a seamless, coordinated response, sending a powerful message to Beijing. Forces were placed on peak alert as warships held their positions in a tense standoff, a visible symbol of the new, unified resolve. While emergency diplomacy worked to de-escalate, the verdict was clear. China's aggression had forged a stronger opposition, altering the strategic landscape in the Allies' favor. If China pushes further, the world watches with bated breath. The South China Sea has become a geopolitical powder keg, where China's assertive expansion and militarization of artificial islands challenge the established international order. Each naval patrol is a deliberate step on a potential path of confrontation. The United States and its allies respond with freedom of navigation operations, a constant show of force designed to deter aggression. But this delicate dance of warships and fighter jets is fraught with risk. A single miscalculation or an accidental collision could be the unintended trigger. So, will this be the spark that ignites the Pacific? A conflict here would not be a distant skirmish. It would be a global event, shattering supply chains and drawing in a complex web of alliances. While diplomatic channels remain open, the window for de-escalation may be closing. The balance of power hangs precariously, with the fate of the region resting on a knife's edge.